Now, the World Bank has finally approved South Africa's nearly 8 billion rand loan for the country's vaccination drive. It's understood that this loan comes with low interest and will assist the country to acquire 47 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses. Let's bring in Investec Chief Economist Annabel Bishop to give us some reaction to her thoughts. Thank you very much, Ms. Bishop, for your time here on All Angles. You can imagine how South Africans feel every time the World Bank approves yet another loan for our country. Are we actually in a position to take more loans as a country?
Well, we take more loans every year. You know, South Africa's got a very high level of government debt. And that's, of course, the reasons why we've seen these credit rating downgrades over the past decade. And one of the factors that has been problematic has been that our interest rates on the government debt have been very high. If you look at our current 10-year benchmark government bonds, it's at about 10.8% the last time I looked. Now, taking loans from the World Bank are much easier terms, and you actually get a very much lower interest rate on them. Plus, the actual size of these World Bank loans that we've taken, this is not the first one, are also minuscule in comparison both to the total amount of debt that South Africa has already borrowed from other sources, and of course as well the amount that it's going to borrow going forwards. So I don't think we need to worry at all about this, and in fact I think it's actually a positive step, because it allows us funding to pay for historic use of vaccines, as well as obviously looking forward. That's obviously what the World Bank intends for us to use it for. And of course, as a consequence of that, we get this very preferential interest rate that we wouldn't get elsewhere.
I want to go back to what you said then. You were giggling a bit, you know, what it's actually meant to be used for. If we're all honest, in South Africa, we've had quite a run when it comes to that, right?
Look, I think we've got a much stronger national treasury. We have certainly, or should I say, a much stronger SARS, and we've certainly seen strengthened national treasury and government finances. I think it will be used for that. I think Enoch Godongwana is a superb finance minister, and he's done exceptionally well. One point we haven't mentioned, and I think you and I need to bear this in mind, is that the fastest growing spend item in the budget is actually the acceleration in servicing debt. And that's because the interest rates are so very high on South Africa's debt. So if we can find alternate sources, even small sources, where the interest rate is very low, that is actually a very positive outcome.
So it is positive that we're getting this loan on a lower interest rate, whereas we couldn't get it elsewhere. But in terms of what South Africans need, in terms of services from government, for instance, water, electricity, Eskom is under, you know, a lot of strain at the moment. They already sent out a warning saying that they might actually switch off our lights at the last minute. People are looking for jobs. So even if this is a positive outcome in terms of our repayment, what does it do for the ordinary man on the ground?
Well, it's really intended just for COVID vaccines. So it's intended to improve health for the ordinary man on the ground. And I think that's all we can really look at this World Bank loan for. It really doesn't do anything else. It's not intended for anything else. And it's certainly not a silver bullet for South Africa's problems. In fact, if we have a look at the real issues, which is what you've mentioned, of course, insufficient water, electricity, poor service quality to really abhorrent levels of service quality in South Africa for many citizens, we need to actually look at the administration. We need to look at the service, the people who provide these services, the delivery of these services in government, but we also need to look at the past decade as well of looting and corruption and destruction of key institutions like Eskom, and of course the water board is one of the key areas as well. Water infrastructure hasn't been improved and replenished the pace it should, but also of course as well management is very poor. You know, we here in the Eastern Cape now, their dam levels, some of their dams have reached critically low levels. They're going to stop pumping water. All of these are due to very, very poor governance. And of course, you know, that has been the destruction of state capture over the past decade. And what South Africa actually needs is to start to vote in a much stronger political leadership, whether it's at the municipality level. Of course, I think that's why we saw the ANC dip quite substantially in the last municipal elections, as individuals voted in their councils for who they thought would bring about better service delivery. But of course, overall in South Africa as well, we found that in South Africa, we've just seen an absolute focus on corruption and really self-enrichment permeating the government and governance of South Africa at the expense of service delivery. In other words, it's been so excessive that it's overshadowed service delivery. It's overshadowed the focus on service delivery. And I think for many in government, the focus is not on the people and delivering services to them, despite how much lip service is actually paid to it. But of course, rather instead, as you and I were talking about, personal self-enrichment, corruption, and just all sorts of financial shenanigans that seem to go on. We also, of course, have big problems in terms of skills capacity. We don't have sufficient skilled individuals to deliver the services. And, government with its policies that it's following, that it's bringing in constant changes in the regulations, new regulations, makes it even more difficult to achieve this.
I don't mean to sound negative in terms of this, but I'm just trying to understand, from an economist, in terms of us getting this loan. Yes, fine, I see that it's positive in terms of fighting COVID-19 and, of course, the fact that we got it at a lower interest rate, etc. But are we not still paying off the previous loan that we got from the World Bank pertaining to the exact same fight against COVID-19, that we know didn't actually filter down to the beneficiaries as well? We also have, for instance, just for an example, some of the COVID-19 doses that we did have expiring because people refused to go there. So isn't this a vicious cycle in terms of paying all these loans, even though this time we get this one at a lower interest rate?
I think the previous loans, whether it's from the IMF or the World Bank, also had very preferential low interest rates, but they make up a tiny percentage, less than 1% of our total overall borrowing. So, it's not something we should be unduly worried about or focus on. But I absolutely agree with the statements you make. There's been poor management around the disbursement of the funds. We look at those terrible PPE frauds. We look at the looting that went on there. We look at the digital vibe scandals. We look at all sorts of types of corruption that permeate the system in South Africa. And what that really does is it eats up monies. It eats up efficiency by putting in people's pockets who are not entitled to it. And, of course, as a consequence of that, there's less delivery for citizens in South Africa. It also has a very negative effect on job creation, because not only does it create a negative environment for business sentiment, but also businesses themselves are negatively affected by insufficient water, insufficient electricity, poorly maintained roads with potholes. We've heard about, some of the businesses that have just relocated or even looking to shut down because service delivery is so difficult for them. But not only that, the very high costs associated with as well. If you're going to be looting a lot of funds from Eskom, from other areas, you're going to have less to spend on electricity infrastructure. And of course, that's part of the problem that we've seen. But we've also seen very poor and shoddy build. And of course, that's also reduced their delivery. But, many people in South Africa can actually, and here we're talking about business owners, entrepreneurs, they can move to other areas of the world where government does support much better the business environment. And of course, that's what we are seeing in South Africa. And I think that's something that, the looters, the corrupt don't think about. First of all, because I don't think they're really that worried about it. And secondly, of course, as well, because for them, it's a very short-term effect, the looting, the corruption, the lack of efficiency, the lack of skills. Sure, the Ramaphosa presidency is looking to turn this around, but it's such a large, difficult, enormous shift to turn around. And of course, we even see that with Eskom. Just maybe one quick point on Eskom. Very few electricity utilities in the world both transmit, produce, and deliver electricity. And of course, the government's looking to divide them into 3 sections. But still, very few electricity utilities build large power stations like Eskom, Medupi. And again, that was an error.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me, Annabel Bishop. She's a chief economist at Investec.